Everyone thought it was just a dog visiting his sick owner, until he did that and the entire room froze in disbelief. Annabelle Marsh, the 13-year-old with wise, sorrowful eyes, felt the hush of early evening settle around the small suburban house like a gentle cloak of dusk. She sat on the porch, the chill of November brushing her cheeks, her slender figure wrapped in a thick blanket. Barely 6 months before, doctors had delivered the news that changed her family's life forever, a rare, aggressive form of leukemia. Time was no longer limitless. Indeed, it now felt as if every second was precious, as though each breath had to be savored. At her side, Shadow, a regal German shepherd with dark sable fur, gazed alertly down the quiet street. He was both her guardian and closest friend. The dog had arrived on a mild spring morning, soon after Annabelle's diagnosis, when she seemed to be losing her will to fight. Her parents, Emily and Robert, hoped that a well-trained companion might renew her spirit. From the instant Shadow trotted into their lives, the connection between him and Annabelle was immediate. Though her energy waned by the day, she insisted on performing small tasks for him, refilling his water bowl or brushing his coat. In return, Shadow stood watch with a devotion beyond normal canine loyalty, his intense eyes suggesting he had a mission that transcended mere friendship. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, painting the sky with streaks of red and gold, Emily emerged from the house with a small mug of herbal tea and a handful of medication. Her eyes, pink from recent tears, flicked toward Annabelle. "Come in soon," she murmured, striving for a gentle tone. "It's getting colder." Annabelle simply nodded, one hand resting on Shadow's back. "Just a few more minutes, Mom," she replied quietly. Even the crisp air felt more precious to her these days, as though every sensation mattered. By the time Robert returned from the hospital, where he spent countless hours researching treatment options, the last of daylight had faded. He was a reserved man with a determined cast to his features. That night, as the family gathered in the living room to read together, Shadow curled at Annabelle's feet, raising his head whenever she coughed. His deep brown gaze never left her. Over the past week, an unspoken tension had invaded the house. The doctors warned that her condition was advancing more rapidly than hoped. Emily woke every morning with dread, checking on Annabelle's breathing like it might be her last. Robert poured his efforts into scouring medical journals and calling specialists, but the answers seemed elusive. Through it all, Shadow remained steadfast, as if silently assuring them that his presence alone was a fortress of calm. Then came a stormy afternoon near the end of November. The phone rang just as thunder rumbled overhead. Emily rushed to answer, bracing herself. The oncology center was on the line to say there was a new opening in a clinical trial. Additional evaluations were needed immediately. The frantic swirl of clouds outside mirrored her roiling thoughts. Racing upstairs, she found Annabelle lying on her bed, reading a worn fantasy novel. Though her breathing was shallow, she gifted her mother a tentative smile. "Sweetheart," Emily began, forcing calm into her voice. "The hospital wants you in tomorrow. There's a new trial." Annabelle's eyes brightened. She glanced at Shadow, whose ears perked up. "Hear that, buddy?" she whispered, stroking his soft fur. "We might get another chance." Despite the glimmer of hope, Emily's stomach lurched at the uncertainty. By nightfall, the storm raged violently. Annabelle clung to Shadow with each crack of thunder, pressing her face into his neck whenever lightning flared. Long after midnight, the rain eased. Still, a charged silence lingered in the air. Early the following morning, Emily and Robert accompanied Annabelle to the hospital, her pale hands trembling around the edges of her thin coat. She carried a plush toy shaped like a German shepherd in one arm and clung to Robert with the other. Although the hospital banned large animals, the staff knew Shadow's exceptional gentleness. He was allowed to wait in a corner of the lobby, watched by a sympathetic nurse who had seen his calming effect on Annabelle. Inside, the nurses drew blood, conducted scans, and asked endless questions. By noon, Annabelle looked exhausted. Beyond the closed doors, Shadow whined softly, pacing until the nurse patted his flank. At last, Dr. Whitmore, the lead oncologist, joined Emily and Robert in the corridor. His face was somber but steady. "She meets the criteria for now. It's experimental and not a guaranteed cure, but it could give her more time." Emily's relief was tinged with fear. She thanked the doctor anyway, clinging to the thinnest thread of hope. When Annabelle was wheeled out, looking frail in a small chair, Shadow sprang to his feet, muzzle lifting in quiet greeting. A wave of emotion passed through everyone who witnessed it, a dog's loyalty transcending the confines of hospital rules. Annabelle managed a small, grateful smile, resting a shaky hand on his back as if anchoring herself. Emily felt her heart constrict at the tenderness in her daughter's eyes. The next few days blurred into a routine of intravenous treatments and side effects. The hospital room became their second home. Shadow stayed by her bed, sometimes gazing up as if sensing her discomfort even before the nurses did. By week's end, Annabelle was bone-tired, her once lively spirit dimmed. Yet Shadow's presence seemed to grant her just enough strength to endure the hardest moments. Word spread among the staff about the German Shepherd who never left his young owner's side. People whispered in awe, noting how he would nudge the nurses if Annabelle's machines beeped or whine outside the door if forced to wait. But no measure of loyalty can defeat certain forms of fate. A month into the trial, Dr. Whitmore soberly explained that the results were not what they had hoped. Though the treatment slowed the cancer, it had already ravaged her body. There was nothing more to do aside from managing her pain. Emily broke down in uncontrollable sobs, and Robert stood like a statue, fighting tears. Annabelle remained quiet, stroking Shadow's ears. Anyone who looked into her eyes would see acceptance, and a subdued heartbreak too profound for words. They brought her home on palliative care, the living room rearranged to accommodate a hospital bed. Neighbors delivered sympathy and casseroles, though the Marshes barely remembered to eat. Every minute focused on Annabelle's comfort. The nurse visited daily, adjusting medication. In those final nights, while the rest of the house fell silent, Shadow's watchfulness intensified. He lay close, nose near Annabelle's hand, ears flicking at every subtle change in her breathing. Then, in the stillness of one dreadful night, her breathing became alarmingly erratic. Robert fumbled with the oxygen equipment, checking for blockages. Emily hovered, tears brimming, as the nurse tried to calm them both. But they did not see a small kink forming in the hose until Shadow rose, whining in urgent notes. He pawed at the machine and let out a bark so forceful that it startled them all. With trembling hands, Robert discovered the hose's obstruction and fixed it. Oxygen flooded again, and Annabelle's breathing steadied. Overcome by relief, Emily held her daughter's hand, pressing her lips to it in a silent prayer of thanks. "Thank God," she breathed, her cheeks wet with tears. "Thank God, Shadow." Robert knelt and cradled the dog's head, voice cracking. "You saved her again, boy. You saw what we didn't." News traveled swiftly through the local community. Everyone wanted to hear the story of how a German Shepherd safeguarded a girl so close to the edge. Though no cure remained for Annabelle, Shadow's intervention had surely prolonged her life, granting a few more precious days or perhaps weeks. More than that, he renewed a spark of hope that love, even amid inevitable tragedy, still radiated fiercely. That evening, as Emily sang a lullaby in a trembling voice, and Robert stood watch with exhausted eyes, Shadow rested on the floor with an air of quiet determination. No one could say how much time was left. Yet in each moment, Annabelle's heart continued to beat. The devotion shining in Shadow's gaze reminded them that miracles, however small, still grace the darkest hours. If this story resonates with you, share your thoughts or experiences below and stay with us for more. We've only begun exploring the depths of this bond between a girl and her faithful protector. Annabelle awakened the next morning with shallow breaths, feeling the gentle press of Shadow's muzzle against her cheek. The hush that suffused the house felt even heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. She lifted her hand to scratch behind his ears, and he responded with a soft whine that made her smile, if only for a moment. Her mother, Emily, who had dozed in a chair by the bed, stirred at the sound of movement. She rose, silently bringing a fresh glass of water to her daughter. Each day now, she tried to find something bright in Annabelle's eyes, some glimmer of the determined spirit that used to guide her through dance recitals, science fairs, and exuberant sleepovers with her best friend Lucy. But that brightness had dimmed over the months, leaving behind a poignant acceptance that both baffled and broke her mother's heart. "It's still early," Emily murmured, gently brushing Annabelle's hair aside. "Do you need more rest?" Annabelle shook her head. "I'd like to sit outside in the yard if that's okay. I want to feel the air." Emily nodded, taking a moment to steady herself. Any exertion now had to be approached with caution, but if her daughter wanted fresh air, she would give everything to make it happen. With careful steps, they slowly navigated from the living room to the back porch, where a weak winter sun attempted to pierce the cloudy sky. Shadow trotted alongside, ears at half-mast, as though sensing every flicker of Annabelle's energy. Robert joined them moments later, quiet as always, but carrying a folded blanket. He draped it gently over Annabelle's shoulders before crouching to give Shadow a pat. The dog's eyes darted between father and daughter, unspoken vigilance evident in his posture. Robert felt a wave of gratitude welling in his chest for this steadfast companion who seemed to understand more than anyone could guess. Though the day was gray and cold, Annabelle closed her eyes in peaceful acceptance of the natural world around her. She could hear distant birds, the hum of a neighbor's lawnmower, and the rustling wind among bare branches. Yet what gave her the most comfort was the warm presence of Shadow pressed against her leg. In moments like this, she almost forgot her frailties. That afternoon, two close friends of the family, Harriet and Dean, arrived with groceries and homemade soup. They found Annabelle quietly perched on a wooden bench, a faint smile on her face as Shadow rested his chin on her knee. Harriet knelt to greet them both, her eyes brimming with compassion. "We've been thinking about you non-stop," she whispered, voice catching. Annabelle reached out with surprising warmth. "Thank you," she said softly. "Shadow's been making sure I stay happy." Harriet managed a tremulous laugh, brushing a tear from her cheek. "He's such a good boy, isn't he?" "He's the best," Annabelle replied, her tone resolute in a way that hinted at a deeper understanding. "I'm not scared when he's here." Dean, standing nearby, cleared his throat. "I spoke to Lucy's parents," he said hesitantly. Lucy, Annabelle's friend, had moved to another state before the diagnosis took a turn. "They wanted to visit, but I wasn't sure how you felt, so I told them I'd check." Annabelle's eyes flickered with a complex swirl of emotions. Once, the thought of reuniting with Lucy would have made her leap in excitement. But these days, she worried about the sorrow it might cause. I'd like to see her," she said at last, though her voice held a quiet fear. "But soon, please, before I'm too tired." Dean nodded, pressing his lips together. "I'll let them know." Later, Emily and Robert retreated inside with Harriet and Dean to talk quietly at the kitchen table, discussing how to arrange Lucy's visit. Left in the hush of the yard, Annabelle leaned her head against Shadow's broad shoulder. "Thank you," she breathed, "for always being here." The dog exhaled softly in response, a gentle sigh that carried more meaning than words. The following day, the nurse arrived to adjust Annabelle's medication. Though the nurse wore a practiced mask of calm, she too recognized that Annabelle's struggle was nearing its final stretch. Shadow stood watch from a corner, occasionally stepping forward to rest his nose near Annabelle's hand whenever the nurse tightened a blood pressure cuff or checked her IV line. After the nurse finished, she paused to marvel. "I've seen therapy animals, but your Shadow is extraordinary," she remarked to Emily. "It's like he can sense her discomfort before she says a word." Emily, tears threatening to spill, nodded wordlessly. She sometimes wondered if Shadow was heaven sent, arriving just in time to guide Annabelle through the darkest corridors of fate. "Thank you for everything," she whispered, gently stroking the dog's ears as the nurse packed her equipment. She could only hope that the final days or weeks, however many were left, would be filled with love rather than fear. That afternoon brought a rare hour of vitality for Annabelle. She woke from a nap with a desire to paint. Emily helped her gather art supplies in the living room, covering the coffee table with newspapers. Shadow lay at her feet, tail wagging gently whenever she dipped a brush in vibrant colors. She painted slow, dreamy landscapes with soft clouds and bright bursts of flower petals. None of them followed the lines of realism. Instead, they captured something luminous and free. In each painting, a figure resembling Shadow stood among fields of lavender or under cherry blossom trees. It was as though she wanted him to have a place in every beautiful world her imagination could conjure. Robert finished a phone call in the next room and stepped over to watch. Seeing his daughter's focus and serenity, he felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Love, pride, despair. He swallowed hard. "They're still calling with every experimental option," he said. "Every new concept, no matter how slim the odds. We can—" Annabelle shook her head gently. "Not anymore, Dad." Her voice was quiet but sure. "I'm tired. The medicine, it hurts. I don't want to spend the rest of my time in a hospital, hoping for a miracle that may never come." His eyes stung and he knelt beside her, placing a hand on Shadow's neck. The dog's steady presence eased the tremor in Robert's voice. "I won't push," he whispered at last, though his heartbreak shone through. "I just want you to know we'll do anything for you." Annabelle looked at her father's tearful expression, then reached to pat his cheek with her paint-stained fingers. "I know," she said softly, "and that means everything to me." The days that followed felt like an odd mixture of heartbreak and small stolen joys. One morning, Harriet and Dean returned, bearing a homemade chocolate cake. Though Annabelle could only manage a couple of bites, her smile lit up the room. Shadow, tail wagging discreetly, lay at her side, as if also partaking in the sweetness of the moment. Emily snapped a photo, capturing the fraction of laughter that lifted Annabelle's face. She'd never forget how vibrant her daughter looked for that brief second, cheeks flushed, eyes bright, Shadow gazing up in adoration. Meanwhile, Lucy's family arranged their trip. When Lucy walked through the front door one crisp afternoon, Annabelle's breath caught. There was her best friend, the girl with the thick braids and unstoppable grin, who'd played hide-and-seek with her under summer sun just a year ago. Lucy's eyes filled with tears at the sight of Annabelle's frailty, but she forced a brave smile and dropped her suitcase by the door. "Hey, Belle," she said, using the old nickname. "Long time no see." Annabelle smiled faintly, hugging Lucy with thin arms. "Shadow, meet Lucy," she said, beckoning the dog closer. "He's my hero." Lucy knelt to pet Shadow's head, tears brimming in her eyes. "I've heard all about you, buddy." The girls spent hours in Annabelle's room, flipping through old photo albums. Lucy told stories of her new school, her confusion about living so far away, how she missed Annabelle every day. They giggled at pictures of themselves in silly costumes, or with melted ice cream cones, reminiscing about simpler times. All the while, Shadow lay in the hallway, occasionally peeking in as if to confirm that his charge was safe. One evening during Lucy's stay, Annabelle had a bout of intense pain. Emily and Robert rushed to her bedside, administering medication. Lucy, tears streaming, held her friend's trembling hand. Shadow, as always, placed himself near, letting out gentle whines whenever Annabelle gasped. Each wave of pain eventually subsided, leaving her exhausted but calmer. When it was over, she looked at her friend, both of them weeping in the dim glow of a bedside lamp, and whispered, "I'm so glad you're here." Though the anguish carved deep lines in Emily and Robert's faces, Lucy's presence brought moments of genuine laughter, reminiscent of a time before hospitals and fear. Shadow, too, seemed to understand that Lucy provided a different kind of healing, a reaffirmation of simple joys in the midst of sorrow. Each night, after Emily guided Lucy to the guest room, Annabelle would rest her hand against Shadow's flank, drawing quiet solace from the warmth that radiated through his fur. But as Lucy's visit neared its end, the gravity of Annabelle's condition sharpened. A midday phone call from the nurse left Emily pale. "She's likely entering her final stage," the nurse cautioned. "Focus on comfort and support." Each syllable resonated like a bell toll. Now the entire house seemed to hold its breath in anticipation of the darkest hour. Lucy lingered by the window of the guest room, watching the last rays of the sun fade behind a line of rooftops. She found it impossible to reconcile her memories of Annabelle as the exuberant girl who used to bound down the school hallway, forever ready to share secrets, with the delicate figure in the next room clinging to life. Throughout her stay, she had tried to keep the mood light, telling funny stories from her new town, discussing silly videos on her phone. But deep down, a gnawing sense of urgency plagued her. Shadow, never far from Annabelle's side, occasionally stopped by the doorway as if to check on Lucy too. That evening, Emily prepared a small dinner of soup and toast. The clatter of dishes felt unnaturally loud in the pensive hush. Annabelle managed a few spoonfuls, her gaze drifting toward the paintings she had made earlier in the week, bright, hopeful scenes marked by the silhouette of a noble German shepherd. Lucy sat close, stirring her own bowl absently, and offering a gentle smile whenever Annabelle glanced her way. Although Lucy had never been a dog person before, she couldn't deny the powerful aura Shadow exuded. It was as though the dog sensed exactly when to approach, silently nudging his nose against Annabelle's hand if her breath grew strained. He also seemed to stand guard over the entire household, pacing from room to room until he was satisfied everyone was all right. Late that night, Lucy found herself in the hallway, restless. She couldn't sleep, haunted by visions of her best friend's pale face and shallow breathing. At the far end, she saw a faint glow from beneath the door of Annabelle's bedroom. Curious and concerned, Lucy crept closer, pushing it open gently. Annabelle was awake, propped on pillows, stroking Shadow's ears. The dog lay half on the bed, muzzle resting near her lap, while her father, Robert, dozed in a nearby chair. "Hey," Lucy whispered. "Should you be up?" Annabelle motioned for her to come in. "It's the pain," she said softly. "The nurse changed my meds, so I'm feeling a bit restless." She gave Lucy a wan smile. "Sit with me?" Lucy tiptoed past Robert, settling on the edge of the bed. Shadow shifted slightly to make space, his tail giving a slow, gentle thump. Annabelle's small hand reached out, clasping Lucy's. "I'm glad you're here," she said. "I needed to talk." Something in her tone made Lucy's chest tighten. "Of course. Anything." Annabelle paused, eyes drifting toward the softly glowing lamp. "I don't know how much time I have left," she said, "but there's something I want you to promise me. I need you to look after Shadow when I'm not here anymore." Lucy's heart lurched. She had suspected this request might be coming, but hearing it spoke aloud was another matter. "But he's your dog," she managed, voice trembling. "He belongs with you." "He'll always be with me," Annabelle murmured, blinking back tears. "But I think he's meant for more than just staying here, waiting for me to go. He has so much love to share. He's helped me in ways I never imagined. Will you take him home, Lucy? Give him a future?" Lucy tried to steady her breathing, glancing at Shadow. His ears stood at attention, as if aware of the conversation. I'm not even sure what my parents will say," Lucy admitted. "They've never talked about getting a dog." But as she gazed into Annabelle's earnest eyes, she felt a surge of resolve. "I'll ask them, and if they say no, I'll convince them, whatever it takes." A flicker of gratitude lit Annabelle's face. She offered Lucy a trembling smile. "Thank you." When Lucy leaned in to hug her, Shadow pressed close, enveloping them both in comforting warmth. In that moment, Lucy silently vowed that she would do everything possible to honor Annabelle's wish. The following morning, Emily found Lucy in the kitchen, phone in hand. She'd called her parents an hour earlier to propose the idea. Her mother had fallen into shocked silence. Her father had hesitated. Both promised to consider it carefully. Now Lucy paced, anxious for an answer. When the phone buzzed at last, she snatched it up. "Yes, Mom?" she asked, hardly daring to hope. Emily hovered nearby, arms folded gently, while Lucy's expression morphed from hesitation to relief. "Are you sure? It's a big responsibility," Lucy's voice trembled. "Yes, I know. No, I promise I'll do everything. Okay, thank you." She hung up, tears of mingled sadness and relief streaming down her cheeks. She turned to find Emily waiting. "They said yes," Lucy managed. "I can't believe it." Emily's eyes glistened. "Annabelle will be so happy to hear that." With a shaky breath, she gathered Lucy into a hug. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to her and to all of us." Buoyed by that momentary lightness, Lucy rushed to Annabelle's side to share the news. Despite the drained look on her friend's face, Annabelle lit up. "I knew it," she whispered. "Shadow has more miracles to work." But as the hours slipped by, Annabelle's energy waned noticeably. By mid-afternoon, the nurse observed that her pulse was weaker than before, her color paler. The hush returned to the house, heavier than ever, each person sensing that the inevitable was near. Robert stepped onto the porch, tears slipping down his cheeks as he phoned a close relative to gently suggest they come. Emily sat at the foot of Annabelle's bed, stroking her feet through the blanket. Lucy remained close, describing future plans for Shadow in a soft voice meant to bring comfort. A big yard, a warm bed, and endless adventures exploring new trails. Shadow lay pressed to Annabelle's side, silent and protective. At times he let out a low, sorrowful sound, as if disturbed by the changes in her heartbeat. Hours melted into one another, turning into a haze of quiet tears, hushed conversations, and the mechanical hum of the portable oxygen. As evening approached, Harriet and Dean stopped by, quickly subdued by the fragile atmosphere. They brought extra blankets, tissues, and soft music to play in the background. Annabelle woke briefly to greet them, though her voice barely rose above a whisper. Late that night, a hush enveloped the home. Emily insisted Lucy take the guest room to rest, while she and Robert stayed at Annabelle's side. Shadow, refusing to budge, perched on the bed so his muzzle hovered near Annabelle's chest. The nurse had prepared a higher dosage of pain relief, anticipating that the final decline was close. A calm stretched through the house, a stillness that felt both heartbreaking and sacred. Around 2 a.m, Annabelle stirred. Emily, half asleep in her chair, jolted awake. Robert, who had nodded off, raised his head. They both saw Annabelle's eyes open, and for an instant there was clarity. "Mom, Dad," she said, voice hushed but clear. "Thank you for everything." Emily choked back a sob, brushing her daughter's hair from her forehead. "We love you so much," she whispered. "We're here." Annabelle's gaze shifted to Shadow. With considerable effort, she lifted a hand to pat his head. "You stay with Lucy," she murmured. "Be as good to her as you've been to me." Shadow emitted a low, gentle whine, leaning in to nuzzle her palm. Robert's tears fell freely as Annabelle's breath rattled. She took one final, trembling inhale, exhaling in a soft sigh that lingered in the silence. Emily gripped her daughter's hand, stunned by the stillness. She sensed the moment when the last vestige of life slipped away from Annabelle's fragile body. Soft lamplight gleamed on Annabelle's peaceful features, and outside an unusual hush seemed to blanket the entire street. Shadow let out a mournful whine, burying his muzzle against Annabelle's arm. Robert bowed his head, pressing trembling lips to his daughter's brow. Emily wept into her hands. In the corridor, Lucy had awakened and stood frozen, tears trickling down her cheeks as she recognized the finality in the hush. Nobody could say how many minutes passed in that suspended state. Eventually, the nurse, with practiced empathy, stepped in to check for a pulse. She nodded sadly, eyes brimming. The reality of it crashed in waves, each occupant of the house feeling as though an anchor had been cut away, letting them drift into a sea of grief. Shadow refused to leave Annabelle's side until Robert gently coaxed him off the bed so the nurse could carry out her duties. Even then, the German shepherd circled the room, sniffing at the sheets, whining low, refusing to accept that Annabelle was gone. Lucy, tears pouring, crouched beside him and stroked his fur. "It's okay," she whispered, voice trembling. "We'll take care of each other now." The next hours were a somber blur. Emily and Robert contacted the funeral home. Harriet and Dean helped remove the medical equipment. Lucy, feeling overwhelmed, took Shadow outside into the cold pre-dawn air. In the faint glow on the horizon, she thought she sensed Annabelle's presence, a gentle assurance that some piece of her spirit remained. Shadow stared at the changing sky, ears alert, as though searching for the voice that had guided him for months. By the time the sun rose, an unearthly hush had settled. The Marsh home felt simultaneously empty and brimming with echoes of memories. Emily and Robert embraced Lucy, thanking her repeatedly for being there. The funeral would be in a few days' time, and Lucy's parents would arrive to support her. In the meantime, Lucy found herself drawn more closely to Shadow. She knelt to cradle his face, looking into his amber eyes. "You're with me now," she said, trying to sound brave. "I promise I'll do everything I can to love you the way she did." Behind her, the wind whispered through the bare branches, carrying the faintest echo of Annabelle's laughter across the yard. Shadow blinked once, then nuzzled Lucy's hand, as if giving his own promise in return. In the days following Annabelle's final breath, the Marsh household existed in a fog of grief. Mourners came and went, delivering sympathy, flowers, or trays of food. Emily and Robert, haggard with loss, drifted like specters from one gesture of condolence to another, forcing polite smiles as they accepted hugs from neighbors. Lucy's parents arrived soon afterward to support the funeral arrangements, bringing Lucy's younger brother along. The corridors, once filled with Annabelle's laughter, seemed haunted by echoes of a life cut short. Through it all, Shadow padded softly from room to room, searching for the presence that had guided him. For Lucy, the sorrow weighed heavily, but so did an unexpected sense of purpose. She made phone calls from the Marsh's living room to coordinate Shadow's future. Occasionally, she caught glimpses of Emily, who would watch her with tear-filled gratitude. If Lucy's parents had shown even the faintest hesitation before, now they were resolute. Shadow would be welcomed into their home. Still, Lucy fretted over practicalities like training schedules, vet appointments, and whether the dog would feel disoriented without Annabelle, Every time her eyes landed on him, she remembered her best friend's final wish that he never go unloved. On the day of the funeral, a cold drizzle fell, matching the somber mood. People gathered in the modest chapel to say their goodbyes, their faces etched with sorrow. A small table held keepsakes from Annabelle's life, a ballet slipper from her first recital, a paintbrush, and a stuffed plush shaped like Shadow. That final memento drew tears from anyone who looked at it for too long. Each eulogy spoke of Annabelle's gentle kindness and bright curiosity. Despite the subdued ambiance, there was a universal recognition that she had left a mark far beyond her brief years. Shadow himself stayed outside the chapel near the entrance, accompanied by Harriet. Though animals typically weren't permitted inside, many mourners stepped out to offer him a tearful pat, remembering the quiet heroism he had displayed. With each gentle gesture, Shadow showed no aggression or nervousness, just a solemn acceptance of the sadness around him. Lucy, trying to find strength, snuck out once to kneel beside him in her dark dress. Resting her forehead on his, she whispered how sorry she was that he had lost Annabelle. The dog's silence spoke volumes, and Lucy's tears soaked into his thick fur. After the service concluded, everyone gathered at the Marsh home for a subdued reception. Plates of food covered the dining table, untouched by most guests who found themselves too consumed by sorrow to eat. Emily and Robert moved about like courteous hosts, but their eyes carried the weight of immeasurable loss. In a corner, Lucy stood with Shadow, offering small talk to Harriet, Dean, and a few relatives who shared memories of Annabelle's warmth. Now and then, Lucy felt the strangest sensation that Annabelle still lingered, as though one strong gust of wind might bring her voice echoing back. Eventually, Lucy's parents pulled her aside to discuss the arrangements for Shadow's move. They planned to drive home the following afternoon. Lucy worried about uprooting the German Shepherd so soon after Annabelle's passing, but Emily and Robert both agreed that a quick, decisive transition might ease his confusion. The Marshes knew they lacked the emotional energy to care for him properly, and they trusted Lucy to fulfill Annabelle's final wish. Lucy spent the rest of the reception reassuring them that Shadow would be cherished, promising updates, photos, and frequent visits whenever feasible. The undertone of determination in her voice made them relax. Early the next morning, Lucy found Robert kneeling beside Shadow near Annabelle's old bedroom. The door stood ajar, the walls still filled with watercolor paintings and pinned-up sketches. Outside, a pale winter sun made the windows glow faintly. Lucy hesitated, unsure whether to interrupt, but Robert beckoned her over. His voice, hoarse from sleepless nights, carried an undercurrent of fragile acceptance. He stroked Shadow's neck and whispered, "Take care of him. He'll always remind us of Annabelle's courage." Lucy swallowed hard, promising again that she would devote herself to ensuring Shadow continued his quiet mission of bringing hope. Even as she spoke, she felt Annabelle's absence acutely. A few hours later, Lucy's family packed their car. Emily wrapped her arms around Lucy in a fierce hug, murmuring words of thanks that caught in her throat. Robert placed Shadow's favorite squeak toy on the back seat, the edges chewed and worn from the dog's playful moments with Annabelle. Finally, it was time. Shadow hopped inside, tail drooping in uncertainty, as if sensing they were leaving behind something immeasurably precious. Lucy climbed in after him, her younger brother offering a tentative pat on the dog's head. The Marshes stood in the driveway, tears shining, hands clasped together for support. The sense of finality weighed on everyone. During the drive, Shadow lay with his chin on Lucy's lap, occasionally peering out the window. The passing streets and winter-bare trees blurred by as Lucy's parents tried to fill the silence with small talk. Her mother reminded them about the dog bed waiting at home, the fresh bag of kibble stored in the pantry, and the veterinarian appointment scheduled for next week. Lucy responded in murmurs, her mind tangled in memories. She wondered how Shadow would adapt, how she herself would cope with the magnitude of Annabelle's absence. Yet through it all, his presence was comforting. She gently stroked his ear, whispering promises of a new start. Lucy's home was smaller than the Marsh residence, but cozy. The front yard had an old oak tree, and a fenced backyard offered room to play. Shadow stepped onto the driveway and glanced around, ears perked, tail held low with uncertainty. Lucy's father carried luggage inside, while her mother gestured for Lucy to walk Shadow on a quick tour of their yard. She clipped a borrowed leash onto his collar and led him through the gate. Despite the strangeness of the new location, Shadow's nose twitched, investigating corners and fence edges. Lucy imagined Annabelle cheering them on. The thought gave her courage to keep going. That evening, Lucy tried to recreate something of Annabelle's bedtime routine for Shadow. She placed the well-worn squeak toy near his new dog bed by her bedroom door and spoke softly, recalling how Annabelle used to read him stories. Though Lucy couldn't replicate every detail, she offered gentle strokes behind his ears and told him about the day's events. With each passing minute, he relaxed a fraction more, eventually lying down and resting his head on his paws. Lucy settled into her own bed, tears dampening her pillow as she remembered the night she and Annabelle camped in sleeping bags, giggling until dawn. Now Shadow's quiet breathing was the only reminder of that closeness. In the days that followed, Lucy worked hard to integrate Shadow into her household. She showed him where his bowls were kept, introduced him to her small circle of friends, and walked him around the block twice a day. Her mother was impressed by Shadow's impeccable manners. He rarely barked and never begged at the table. When Lucy's brother invited a friend over, Shadow calmly watched the boys play video games, occasionally sniffing at their discarded snack wrappers. Yet Lucy noticed how sometimes, in the hush of late evening, Shadow would pace near the window, ears perked, as if waiting for someone who never arrived. One cool afternoon, a letter arrived from Emily and Robert, expressing deep gratitude. Tucked inside was a photo of Annabelle with Shadow, both gazing at the camera with quiet joy. Lucy pinned it in her room, running a finger along the edges whenever she passed. Though the ache of loss remained, seeing Annabelle's smile brought a hint of comfort. Lucy spoke to Shadow often, recounting school events and secret worries. Though he offered no words, his steady gaze and wagging tail filled her emptiness with warmth. Taking care of him seemed to ease her grief, reminding her of Annabelle's enduring presence. As evening fell one day, Lucy whispered thanks to her friend for leaving this devoted guardian behind, while Shadow rested his chin on her knee. Sometimes, Lucy thought she heard Annabelle's voice in the hush of night, urging her forward, reminding her that through unconditional love and loyalty, Shadow would keep their bond alive. He, in turn, quietly gave her hope for tomorrow. Lucy adjusted quickly to her new routine of caring for Shadow. Each morning before she left for school, she walked him around the block, letting him sniff the hedges and greet the occasional passerby with a polite wag of his tail. In the afternoons, she hurried home, dropping her backpack in the entryway so she could run to the kitchen to give him a treat. Her parents watched with cautious optimism. They saw Lucy's sorrow, but they also saw the solace she drew from the dog, the faint spark returning to her eyes whenever she talked to him about her day. Shadow, for his part, seemed content to follow Lucy's lead. He slept near her bedroom door at night, and sometimes nudged it open in the early morning hours, peering in as if to be sure she was all right. The entire household soon realized he embodied a presence reminiscent of calm watchfulness, a silent guardian who sensed tension or distress with uncanny accuracy. Whenever Lucy's younger brother fussed about homework or became frustrated over a video game, Shadow would pad over, tilt his head, and let out a soft sound that broke the mood. This typically ended with Lucy's brother laughing at himself or inviting Shadow to lounge at his side. Though the transition went smoothly, Lucy found herself haunted by flickers of memory she wished to share with Annabelle. Whenever she had a tough day at school or felt left out by her new classmates, she imagined confiding in Annabelle over text messages or phone calls. But that chance was lost forever. Instead, Lucy confided in Shadow, reading aloud from her phone while the dog watched her intently. Sometimes, after finishing a story or describing an event, she felt a warm ease settle in her chest, as though Annabelle's spirit shimmered nearby. One Saturday in late winter, Lucy and her family decided to give Shadow a proper outing at a local park. The day was bright and cold, sunlight bouncing off frosty grass. The moment Shadow hopped out of the car, he stood alert, his powerful legs tensing with excitement. Lucy held onto the leash, smiling at his enthusiasm. Though she still felt the ache of missing Annabelle, the crisp air and Shadow's bounding energy lifted her mood. They strolled along a winding path, passing a small pond rimmed with thin ice. Lucy's father joked that in the spring, maybe they'd try a dog-friendly hiking trail. Her brother kicked at bits of gravel on the path, while her mother carried a thermos of hot chocolate for them to share. During this walk, Lucy discovered that Shadow watched other dogs carefully. He didn't bark or lunge, just observed them with a curious tilt of his head. Occasionally, an owner asked if he was friendly, and Lucy always reassured them with a nod. If allowed a polite sniff, Shadow approached with calm dignity. Most strangers remarked on his beautiful coat and gentle manner. Lucy felt a surge of pride each time, remembering how Annabelle had once described Shadow as the best dog in the whole universe. That very afternoon, something happened that confirmed the extraordinary intuition Lucy had begun to sense in him. While they were halfway around the park's loop, Lucy's brother suddenly tripped on a loose rock. It wasn't a bad fall, but he scraped his knee enough to cry out in pain. Before Lucy or her parents could even react, Shadow darted forward, gently nuzzling the boy's shoulder as if to steady him. He let out a soft, anxious whine, then placed himself by the boy's side, almost as if to say, "Lean on me." Lucy's brother wiped at his tears with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. It was a small moment, but a clear sign that Shadow was ever vigilant, ready to help. When they returned home, Lucy's brother proudly recounted the story to a friend over a video call, bragging about how Shadow was practically a superhero. Lucy had to laugh, though her throat tightened at the realization that Annabelle would have loved to see him praised like this. She retreated to her room for a moment, tears pricking her eyes, but soon felt Shadow pressing in behind her. He quietly placed his nose against her hand, as if reminding her that she was never alone. In the following weeks, Lucy found herself juggling the typical swirl of teenage life, homework, social media, and music preferences clashing with her parents' tastes, but always returning to Shadow's side for comfort. One Friday after school, Lucy's mother called her to the living room. Shadow was already there, sitting calmly, while Lucy's father flipped through a binder. They explained that the Marshes had sent over some official paperwork, Shadow's registration records, medical history, and a few certificates showing he'd been through basic and advanced obedience training. According to the documents, he was far more than a simple house pet. "It looks like he's done specialized courses in therapy dog work," Lucy's father remarked, sounding impressed. Lucy glanced up in surprise. "That must be how he knew what to do for Annabelle," she said quietly. "I remember her saying he arrived already knowing so much, like he'd been specially trained for kids who were hurting." She flipped a few more pages, her mind brimming with questions. "Do you think we could continue that path? See if he can help other people somehow?" Her parents exchanged glances. "It might be a big responsibility," her mother cautioned. "He'd need evaluations, certifications, the whole process. But if it's something that matters to you, and if Shadow's temperament is suited for it, then maybe we can try." The thought lingered with Lucy. She recalled how, in Annabelle's last weeks, Shadow's mere presence had brought solace no medication could replicate. If he could do that for others, perhaps it might honor Annabelle's memory by continuing the dog's unique gift. The idea of forging a new purpose with him ignited a small flame of excitement amid her mourning. That evening, as Lucy rubbed Shadow's ears, she whispered, "Maybe we can help people, you and me." The dog let out a soft huff, tail thumping gently on the floor. Within days, Lucy started researching local programs for therapy dog certification. Her mother helped her gather information. Many organizations preferred handlers to be 18 or older, but some allowed younger volunteers if accompanied by an adult. Lucy typed emails and made phone calls explaining Shadow's background and her goal of using his skills to bring comfort to hospitals or care homes. By the end of the week, she'd received a promising reply from a small local therapy dog charity, eager to meet them both. That Saturday, Lucy and her mother drove to a community center where the charity hosted orientation sessions. Shadow lay calmly at Lucy's feet in the back seat, ears flicking at every turn of the road. Upon arrival, they were greeted by a cheerful woman named Patrice, who led them inside to a large, multi-purpose room lined with chairs. 4 other prospective handlers and their dogs were already seated, each listening to a brief lecture on standards for therapy animals. Shadow drew attention right away with his serene demeanor. While the other dogs panted or wagged frantically, Shadow merely observed, wagging his tail slowly whenever someone met his eyes. Patrice welcomed Lucy and her mother, inviting them to join the circle. One by one, participants introduced themselves, sharing how they hoped to use their dogs in hospitals, nursing homes, or even schools for children with special needs. Lucy, her voice shaking just a little, recounted how Shadow had helped her best friend cope with severe illness. Heads nodded in sympathy, a few eyes misted. Patrice offered a comforting smile. "Sounds like Shadow already has valuable experience," Patrice said gently. "We'll do a few sessions to make sure he meets our criteria, but I have a good feeling about him." She then explained the evaluation process, including how dogs needed to exhibit excellent manners, remain calm around noise and medical equipment, and accept gentle handling from strangers. Lucy took careful notes, determined not to let any details slip. Glancing down, she noticed Shadow gazing back at her as though he, too, wanted to get everything right. They concluded the meeting with a quick demonstration. Patrice presented a rolling cart and a walker, 2 objects that commonly made dogs nervous. Each handler took turns walking their pet around the items, letting them sniff the unfamiliar equipment. Shadow did so without hesitation, even nudging the walker's legs as if to investigate. Patrice gave a nod of approval. "He's got exactly the temperament we look for." On the drive home, Lucy cradled a packet of paperwork on her lap, her heart brimming with cautious hope. She felt a sparkle of anticipation she hadn't experienced since before Annabelle grew sick. Maybe this was the beginning of a meaningful path for both her and Shadow, one that not only carried on Annabelle's legacy but also added a new chapter to his life. Staring out at the winter sky, Lucy whispered a silent thanks to her friend, imagining Annabelle's radiant grin. "We'll make you proud," she said under her breath while Shadow quietly rested his muzzle beside her arm. During the following weeks, Lucy and her mother immersed themselves in the therapy dog training program. Twice a week, they drove Shadow to the community center, where Patrice and her team guided them through a progression of exercises. Sometimes the sessions involved simple tasks, teaching the dogs to remain calm amid unusual sounds like crinkling plastic or sudden claps. Other times they mimicked hospital conditions, wheeling in IV stands or letting volunteers approach with canes and walkers. Shadow never flinched. He simply watched each new element with mild curiosity, then sat quietly, tail swishing in a relaxed rhythm. Patrice often paused to commend Lucy's gentle handling. "Remember to keep your voice calm," she'd say. though she rarely needed to correct Lucy at all. From the moment Lucy arrived, Shadow glued his gaze on her, ears pricked for commands. His stoic demeanor soothed the other dogs too, many of which were younger or more excitable. By the end of each session, Lucy felt an odd blend of pride and heartache. Pride because she could see that Shadow was special. Heartache because with every exercise she remembered how he'd learned these skills, guarding Annabelle's final days. On weekend mornings, Lucy woke early to practice what they'd learned, guiding Shadow around the neighborhood while carrying a crinkling plastic bag or bumping a rolling suitcase. The neighbors chuckled at the odd sight, but Lucy didn't mind. She'd do anything to ensure that Shadow became certified. It felt like continuing Annabelle's mission. Each time she glanced at the dog's watchful profile, she whispered thanks for his quiet devotion. Meanwhile, life at school moved on, and Lucy navigated the usual teenage dramas. A few classmates teased her for talking so much about her dog or for missing social outings. One Monday, after an unpleasant confrontation in the cafeteria, Lucy trudged home in tears. She collapsed onto her bed, phone buzzing with half-hearted apologies from the same friends who'd mocked her. Shadow found his way into her room, nose pressed against her leg. Without hesitation, Lucy burst into a monologue about feeling isolated, about how no one understood the pain of losing her best friend. She cried against his furry neck, and Shadow remained perfectly still. The tension gradually drained from her. That evening, she resolved to keep her focus on what mattered, finishing therapy dog certification and honoring Annabelle's memory. By the time February ended, Patrice announced that Shadow was ready for a final evaluation. It would be held at a nearby assisted living center where prospective therapy dogs were tested under real-life conditions. Lucy's mother, having joined every step of training, offered her unwavering support. "I'll arrange for the day off," she said. Lucy nodded, pulse skipping. She clutched Shadow's leash at the thought. Passing this evaluation meant he would officially become a certified therapy dog, able to visit hospitals, nursing homes, maybe even pediatric wards. In that possibility, Lucy saw a chance to keep Annabelle's spirit alive, helping others who suffered. The day of the evaluation dawned crisp and bright. Lucy dressed carefully, choosing neat jeans and a sweater without any distracting logos. She also made sure to attach Shadow's new therapy dog and training bandana, which he wore with quiet dignity. Her father drove them to the assisted living center while her mother sat up front scanning directions on her phone. Lucy peered out the window, nerves flaring. In the back seat, Shadow rested his chin on her knee, as if sensing her tension. His calm eased her jittery thoughts. "We can do this," she murmured, stroking the space between his ears. When they arrived, Patrice greeted them in the lobby, handing Lucy a clipboard with final paperwork. They joined 4 other dog handler pairs who were also there for evaluations: a tall man with a golden retriever, an older woman with a poodle mix, a college student with a black Labrador, and a middle-aged couple with a small terrier. Everyone wore the same anxious expression Lucy felt in her gut. The building smelled of antiseptic and faint floral air freshener. Soft music played in the background. A few residents peered curiously from the hallways, some smiling at the sight of wagging tails. Under Patrice's watchful eye, the dogs went through a series of tasks. First, they walked calmly alongside wheelchairs, ignoring gentle distractions like an attendant dropping papers. Shadow did not so much as blink. Next, volunteers offered the dogs treats in slow, trembling hands, simulating older adults with limited dexterity. Shadow patiently waited, then licked the treat from the volunteer's palm with the lightest touch. Lucy felt tears prick her eyes, remembering how Annabelle had once fed him tiny scraps of biscuit when she was too weak to move much. It was exactly the same tenderness. The final portion involved moving through a recreation area where actual residents gathered. Lucy's mother, perched by the entrance, gave an encouraging nod. Lucy inhaled and led Shadow in, greeting each person softly. Some folks reached out to pet him. Others simply watched with gentle smiles. One woman in particular seemed drawn to Shadow, calling him over with a quavery voice. Lucy asked permission to approach, then guided him closer. The woman ran a frail hand over Shadow's back, murmuring about how she once owned a German Shepherd as a girl. Her eyes misted with memories. Shadow nuzzled her arm in that comforting way Lucy recognized so well, and a grin spread across the woman's face. Patrice, watching from afar, scribbled a note on her clipboard and gave Lucy a small, affirming nod. After they finished, all participants returned to the lobby for final remarks. Patrice shook Lucy's hand, her voice warm with praise. "You two did wonderfully. Shadow is everything a therapy dog should be. Patient, gentle, unflappable in new environments." Lucy beamed. Her mother placed an arm around her, pride radiating. Patrice then handed Lucy a small certificate. "Congratulations, you're officially a therapy team. Keep an eye out for messages from our coordinator about your first assignment." As Lucy and her mother left, her father snapped a photo on his phone. Lucy kneeling beside Shadow, both of them smiling as best a human and dog can. The sunlight pouring in from the glass doors made Shadow's sable fur glisten. Lucy vowed to send that picture to the Marshes later, hoping it might comfort them to see how faithfully Shadow carried on. Lucy's first official therapy visit came sooner than she expected. The charity asked if she could bring Shadow to a local children's library event the following weekend. The librarians were hosting a Reading with Dogs afternoon to encourage reluctant young readers. Lucy's heart quickened at the thought of helping kids connect with books, a small effort that might spark the same kind of creativity Annabelle once poured into her art. She agreed immediately. The day of the library program, Lucy wore a simple name badge pinned to her sweater. Shadow sported his newly earned therapy dog vest. The children's section bustled with parents and kids of various ages, each sign-in desk staffed by volunteers from the charity. Lucy listened attentively as the head librarian explained the setup. Kids who felt shy reading aloud could choose to read a picture book to one of the dogs. Lucy pictured Annabelle perched on her bed, reading fantasy novels to Shadow, voice trembling but determined. She fought back tears. This would be a perfect tribute. Shortly after the event began, a timid boy of about 6 approached Lucy. He clutched a bright storybook with rocket ships on the cover and stared nervously at Shadow's big ears. "He doesn't bite?" the boy asked in a whisper. Lucy shook her head. "He's very gentle." She showed the boy how to hold out his hand. Shadow sniffed, then lifted his muzzle as if in greeting. Encouraged, the boy sat cross-legged on a carpet square, opening his book. Lucy directed Shadow to lie down, letting his chin rest near the boy's knee. Slowly, haltingly, the child began reading about an astronaut's adventures. Every time he hesitated, Shadow gave a faint tail wag, as though urging him to keep going. Soon the boy relaxed, forgot about his anxiety, and stumbled through the longer words with a sense of accomplishment. Lucy watched in silent wonder. She saw children rotate in and out, each taking a turn to read a short story to Shadow. Some were bold, presenting him pictures and waiting as though he might respond. Others were so shy they barely spoke above a whisper. Yet Shadow's presence never wavered. He gazed at each child with unwavering focus, occasionally panting or licking a hand, a reassuring anchor. His calm acceptance drew them out of their shells. At the end of the 2-hour session, the head librarian thanked Lucy with teary eyes. "You have no idea how much this helps kids who struggle with confidence," she said. Lucy felt a lump forming in her throat. She thought of how Annabelle's painting sessions had boosted her own courage at the end, how she had poured her emotions into color and shape. Now Shadow was helping others find their voices through words. The circle felt complete. On the drive home, Lucy's mother reached over to squeeze her hand. "Annabelle would be so proud of you," she whispered. Lucy nodded, keeping her gaze on Shadow in the rearview mirror. He, too, looked content, gazing out the window as the sun set behind them. In that warm glow, Lucy glimpsed a future in which they would continue making small miracles happen, one gentle wag, one quiet moment at a time. After Lucy and Shadow's successful appearance at the library, the small charity group began scheduling them for more sessions. Soon, their weekends were booked with short visits to nursing homes or community centers. Each time, Lucy arrived with quiet determination, still a little nervous about doing everything right, but excited to see the smiles that blossomed whenever a child or elderly resident interacted with Shadow. In the hush of each hallway or activity room, he brought a gentle energy, as though reminding everyone there of simpler joys. Lucy's mother often accompanied them, stepping back to let her daughter take the lead. Despite this growing sense of purpose, Lucy couldn't entirely escape the pangs of grief that still haunted her nights. Some evenings, she woke from dreams in which Annabelle was laughing beside her, healthy and full of life. Waking reality always felt like a cold shock, slicing through her chest. On those nights, Lucy would pad down the hall to find Shadow, who lay dozing near her room. The German Shepherd would lift his head, sensing her sadness, and nuzzle closer. She'd hold on to him, breathing in the soft warmth of his fur. Over time, though it never truly stopped hurting, her tears became something she could manage, wrapped in acceptance rather than raw anguish. One chilly Saturday morning, Lucy's phone rang unexpectedly while she was brushing Shadow's coat in the backyard. It was Harriet, Annabelle's mother's closest friend. Lucy's heart clenched. They hadn't spoken much since the funeral. She quickly ushered Shadow inside, pressing the phone to her ear. Harriet's tone was both sad and eager, explaining that Emily and Robert were sorting through Annabelle's belongings and had discovered a sketchbook, half filled with drawings of Shadow. They wanted Lucy to have it. "They said it belongs with you and him," Harriet added softly. Lucy swallowed a surge of emotion and agreed to pick it up that afternoon. She couldn't help but feel a storm of anticipation and dread when she arrived at the Marsh home later that day. The house looked the same from the outside, yet the air felt different, emptier, as though Annabelle's laughter no longer reverberated against the walls. Emily greeted Lucy at the door with weary eyes, but mustered a kind smile. Robert stood behind her, holding a slim, spiral-bound sketchbook. They invited Lucy in, offering tea in the living room that once buzzed with childhood energy. Shadow had remained in the car, but Lucy couldn't resist glancing toward the front window, imagining him gazing back. "He's doing very well," Lucy said softly, warming her hands on the teacup. "We've started therapy visits. I think Annabelle would be proud." Emily's eyes brimmed with tears. "Thank you for keeping her memory alive," she whispered. Robert handed Lucy the sketchbook and looked away, struggling to maintain composure. Back in the car, Lucy felt a lump in her throat as she turned the pages. The drawings ranged from light-hearted cartoons of Shadow chasing butterflies to more detailed portraits of him lying at Annabelle's feet. Near the end were a few faint pencil outlines of meadows and sunsets left unfinished. Lucy pressed the sketchbook to her chest, tears welling. She felt an urgency to honor what Annabelle had begun. As spring began to tease its arrival, Lucy juggled her school responsibilities, therapy dog assignments, and the swirl of her own emotions. On weekends, she and her mother drove Shadow to various facilities. One of their main stops was the pediatric wing of a local hospital. Initially, Lucy wasn't sure if she was ready for that level of emotional intensity, so many children battling illnesses reminiscent of Annabelle's struggle. Yet when Patrice from the charity suggested they try, Lucy summoned her courage. After all, if Shadow could bring comfort to kids in desperate need, Wasn't that the truest way to honor Annabelle? On their first hospital visit, Lucy gripped Shadow's leash with clammy palms. The pediatric ward smelled of disinfectant, and bright murals decorated the walls in cheerful rainbows. A nurse named Dana greeted them and led them to a small recreation room. Lucy spotted pale, thin-limbed children scattered around tables, some working on puzzles or coloring pages, others simply watching quietly. The hush settled over Lucy like a heavy blanket, stirring memories of Annabelle's final days. She drew in a steadying breath. Shadow glanced up, his gaze steady as though saying, "I'm here, we can do this." They started by introducing themselves to a cluster of kids who paused their activity. One boy, bald from chemotherapy, looked hesitant. Dana encouraged him, and finally he inched closer, curiosity lighting his eyes. "Can I touch him?" he asked softly. Lucy gave a reassuring nod. As the boy reached out, Shadow stayed perfectly still, letting the small hand stroke his ears. Gradually, the boy's features brightened with a kind of hushed amazement. Another child ambled over, then another, forming a half-circle around the dog. Lucy talked with them in a gentle voice, explaining Shadow's calm nature and how he loved hearing stories. A girl offered to read from a picture book she had, and Lucy guided her hand to pet Shadow while she read. Before long, even children too shy to speak found themselves drawn in by the silent invitation. Lucy's eyes misted at the sight. This was exactly what Annabelle had felt, an unspoken solace that no medicine could match. When the session ended, the nurse thanked them sincerely. Lucy felt drained and uplifted all at once, as though she had walked directly into the heart of her own grief and discovered a fragile beauty there. At home that evening, Lucy relaxed in the living room, her legs curled under her, the sketchbook propped open on her lap. Shadow lay at her feet, ears twitching in mild interest. She ran her fingers over Annabelle's penciled outlines of fields and sky, wishing she could ask what colors her friend had intended. Then a thought emerged. Maybe she could finish these drawings herself. Though Lucy wasn't an artist, something in her stirred at the idea. She whispered her plans to Shadow, who cocked his head, as if to say he approved. In the weeks that followed, Lucy continued to juggle therapy visits and personal healing. She placed a small set of colored pencils beside the sketchbook, determined to honor Annabelle's creative spirit by adding gentle hues. At first, her lines wavered, uncertain. Over time, she gained more confidence. Each stroke felt like a conversation with her lost friend. In those moments, she sensed a glimmer of closeness again, a warmth that told her she was doing the right thing. Meanwhile, Lucy's father, noticing how deeply she was pouring herself into both therapy work and these drawings, gently reminded her to find balance. "You're still just 14, he said one evening after she returned from a hospital session. "Make sure you leave room for yourself, for fun, for being a kid." Lucy managed a small smile. "I know, Dad," she replied. Still, she felt an urgency not to waste any chance to help or to remember Annabelle's legacy. Sometimes she worried that if she slowed down, the glow of Annabelle's influence would fade. Shadow, always watchful, pressed closer whenever he sensed her doubts, as though silently encouraging her onward. Their next major milestone arrived in April, when Lucy received a message from Patrice about a special request. A local elementary school was organizing a day of stress relief for children who had recently lost a classmate in a traffic accident. The teachers wanted therapy dogs on campus. Patrice asked if Lucy and Shadow could participate. Lucy hesitated, aware that she'd be stepping into an environment where grief still lingered fresh in every corner. But she also knew that if anyone understood the rawness of loss, it was her. So she agreed. The event took place on a mild afternoon. Lucy wore jeans and a simple tee, with Shadow by her side in his therapy vest. Rows of children filed into the school's gymnasium. Some seemed chatty, others appeared withdrawn. A few therapy dogs scattered around the room with their handlers, forming small stations. Lucy noticed a few curious eyes darting to Shadow's proud stance. The school counselor introduced each team and explained that kids could pet the dogs, ask questions, or just quietly sit with them. Soon, a line of children formed, eager to meet Shadow. One boy, hugging a worn teddy bear, stepped forward. He told Lucy that his best friend had died in the accident. His voice wobbled and tears slipped down his cheeks. Lucy's own throat constricted. She kneeled so their eyes were level, placed a hand on Shadow's back, and explained how sometimes it helps to share sad feelings with a dog because they listen without judgment. The boy cautiously patted Shadow's fur, then leaned in to bury his face against the dog's side. Shadow remained completely still, allowing the boy to cry softly, the tears dampening the thick sable hair. Lucy's eyes burned with tears of her own, remembering how Annabelle had done just that in her final days. For nearly an hour, Lucy and Shadow offered comfort to a steady trickle of mourning children. Some asked about Shadow's life. Others just wanted to rest a hand on his neck. A few timidly offered stories of their lost friend. Lucy responded with gentle words and genuine empathy, aware that each small kindness might help these kids process their grief. When the final bell rang, the counselor pulled Lucy aside, voice filled with gratitude. "What you and Shadow did here, I can't even express how much it means," she said. Lucy smiled through tears. "He's taught me more about healing than I ever imagined," she replied. After loading Shadow back into the car, Lucy's mother drove them home. The entire ride, Lucy stared out the window, replaying each moment with the children. She understood now, more than ever, that helping others find solace was her way of keeping Annabelle's memory alive. Shadow nuzzled her shoulder, and she leaned into his warmth. Even if the pain of loss never fully vanished, she believed that by embracing the spark Annabelle left behind, she and Shadow could create something beautiful in the world, one quiet act of comfort at a time. Lucy's schedule grew more hectic with each passing week, but she found a strange comfort in it. Between schoolwork, family life, and Shadow's therapy visits, her days were crammed full. Yet she never forgot that these endeavors were rooted in love, an echo of Annabelle's spirit still guiding them forward. Every time Lucy felt the ache of missing her friend, she reminded herself that continuing Shadow's work was the purest way to honor her memory. Even her parents, who occasionally urged her to slow down, understood how vital it was for Lucy to channel her grief into something that felt purposeful. Spring melted into early summer, bringing milder weather and a burst of greenery across the neighborhood. The children's library events went from monthly to twice a month, thanks to enthusiastic feedback. Meanwhile, the local nursing home eagerly booked Lucy and Shadow for short visits in the communal lounge, where residents awaited their arrival with open arms. Sometimes Lucy noticed how a gentle pat from Shadow could spark a memory in someone who rarely spoke, coaxing out a brief story of days gone by. She savored these small miracles. A few minutes of lucidity, a burst of laughter, a tearful recall of a cherished moment. It was proof that healing didn't always mean curing. Sometimes it meant embracing a measure of peace. One afternoon, Lucy and her mother drove to a new assignment at Meadowbrook Children's Hospital, a larger facility than the small unit they'd previously visited. Patrice had arranged for them to join a group of volunteers who would spend time in various wings, talking and reading with pediatric patients. Upon arriving, Lucy felt a twinge of nervousness. The building loomed tall, the bustle of nurses and families adding to her sense of stepping into a bigger world. Shadow, however, took it all in stride. He trotted calmly at her side, his therapy vest marking him as a special visitor. In the elevator, a young woman recognized them from a recent newspaper article featuring local therapy dog teams. She smiled and told Lucy that seeing stories about Shadow had inspired her aunt to volunteer at a senior center. Lucy thanked her, marveling that a single dog's devotion could ripple out in so many unseen ways. Their group gathered in a small lounge, and a hospital coordinator briefed them on the unit assignments for the day. Lucy and Shadow were assigned to the oncology floor, precisely the kind of place that carried echoes of Annabelle's last stand against leukemia. Swallowing a lump in her throat, Lucy reminded herself that if Shadow had helped Annabelle, he could help these children too. When they walked down the corridor, the walls were adorned with colorful handprints and bright cartoon decals, as though the hospital tried to cloak its sadness in cheerful paint. Lucy passed a room where a little girl, bald from treatments, peered out with wide eyes. At Lucy's gentle wave, the girl's face lit up in curiosity at the sight of Shadow. Soon they entered a recreation area where half a dozen children were gathered for an arts and crafts session. A volunteer nurse welcomed Lucy, introducing her to the group as they explained Shadow's role. The children, some in wheelchairs, others with IV poles, regarded the dog with fascination. One boy, perhaps 9 or 10, tugged on the nurse's sleeve and asked if he could come closer. Lucy nodded, guiding Shadow gently forward. The boy stretched out a shaky hand. Shadow stood motionless, then leaned his head into the boy's palm. The child gasped as though he had just encountered real magic. Lucy's chest constricted in a flood of emotion. She saw Annabelle's face superimposed behind his eyes, recalling how her friend's thin arm once curved around Shadow's neck in a nearly identical way. Within minutes, a small circle formed, and the children took turns petting Shadow while Lucy told them stories about his training. She explained how he seemed to have a sixth sense for pain or sadness. The children giggled at her tale of Shadow helping Lucy's little brother after a minor fall in the park. When Lucy shared that he'd once sat patiently through hours of reading at the library, a girl raised her hand shyly. "Can I read to him now?" she asked, lifting a well-worn fantasy book. Lucy's throat tightened at the memory of Annabelle doing the same. Nevertheless, she encouraged the girl. Shadow lay down, ears relaxed, while the girl slowly read an excerpt involving a brave heroine and her quest. Every so often, Shadow blinked, almost as if following the plot. By the time the reading ended, the group was smiling. Even the volunteer nurse dabbed at tears, whispering that it was the happiest she'd seen that child all week. After the session, Lucy stepped into the hallway to catch her breath. The emotional weight pressed on her chest. Her mother, who had been observing from the corner, placed a reassuring hand on Lucy's shoulder. "You okay?" she asked softly. Lucy exhaled a shaky sigh. "Yeah, just remembering," she admitted. "I'm glad we're doing this, but it can be hard sometimes." Her mother squeezed gently. "It's normal to feel that way. You're stepping back into places that remind you of Annabelle's last days. But look at these kids. Look at how Shadow's helping them. You're giving them something precious." They continued to another room, guided by the volunteer nurse. This time, Lucy found a boy named Kyle, about 5 years old, who was too weak to join the group activity. He lay in bed, eyes dull from discomfort. When Lucy approached, he turned his head away. His mother hovered near, wringing her hands, explaining that Kyle had been unresponsive since the morning. Lucy moved carefully, letting Shadow lead. The moment Shadow reached the bedside, the boy's expression shifted slightly. He blinked, focusing on the dog. Lucy spoke softly, introducing herself and Shadow, holding out a small stuffed toy shaped like a puppy. She wasn't sure if Kyle would respond, but slowly he extended his tiny fingers to brush Shadow's fur. A fragile smile crossed his lips. The nurse later whispered that Kyle's father had been stuck at work, and they suspected the boy felt despondent. Shadow's presence worked like a gentle balm, coaxing Kyle to sit up a little and whisper that the dog's eyes reminded him of a superhero he'd seen on television. Lucy's vision blurred with tears she wouldn't let fall. She managed to grin at him, nodding as though to confirm that, yes, Shadow indeed possessed the heart of a superhero. When they finally left, Kyle was sleeping more peacefully than before, hugging the stuffed puppy to his chest. As Lucy walked through the corridors toward the elevator, she couldn't shake the sense of déjà vu. She recalled hurrying down hospital hallways to see Annabelle after the latest test or transfusion. Now she was the visitor, stepping in to bring a measure of hope. The difference was staggering. Reaching the lobby, Lucy found a quiet corner and sank into a chair, Shadow at her feet. Her mother, catching up, sat beside her. "I'm proud of you," she murmured. "Annabelle would be too." Lucy closed her eyes for a moment, letting the day's intensity wash over her. "I hope so," she breathed, tangling her fingers in Shadow's neck fur. "Sometimes it still feels impossible that she's gone, like I'll wake up and we'll walk to school together, talking about everything and nothing." Her mother leaned over, pressing a soft kiss to Lucy's temple. "She's here, in all the ways that matter," she said. Lucy hugged her mother, allowing tears to fall. It felt cathartic, sobbing quietly in that hospital lobby, Shadow pressed against her leg in quiet solidarity. Strangely, it wasn't embarrassment she felt, it was relief. She understood that her sorrow could coexist with her resolve to keep moving forward, and that maybe the two belonged together. Driving home, Lucy stared out the window, still emotionally drained. Shadow dozed in the back seat. As they turned onto their street, she saw a familiar figure standing by the mailbox. Robert Marsh, Annabelle's father. She felt her pulse lurch. Her mother eased the car to a stop, and Lucy stepped out to greet him. Robert's smile was subdued but genuine. "We were in town and thought we'd see how you're doing," he said, gesturing toward Emily waiting in their car. Feeling a swirl of gratitude and sadness, Lucy told them about the therapy sessions, how Shadow was thriving, how the children lit up whenever he came near. Robert listened intently, a glimmer of comfort flaring in his eyes. "Annabelle always said he could bring joy to anyone," he murmured, looking at the dog as Lucy opened the back door. Shadow hopped out, bounding over with a low, respectful wag of his tail. Robert knelt and patted the German shepherd, swallowing the lump in his throat. Then Emily joined them, hugging Lucy with damp eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for giving him purpose, and for letting us see it." They chatted briefly, and Lucy's mother invited them all inside for tea. In the warm living room, Shadow lay contentedly on the rug, occasionally lifting his head to watch them. For a moment, Lucy noticed the faintest flicker of joy in Robert's face, remembering how the house had once felt after Annabelle's passing, heavy with unsaid goodbyes. Now, though the sorrow remained, there was also a sense of hope. Here, in the small details of everyday life, Annabelle's love lingered, manifested in the gentle dog who had once guarded her through the darkest nights. As the Marshes prepared to leave, Robert paused, meeting Lucy's gaze. "We're proud of you," he said, voice rough with unspoken emotion. "Keep shining her light, okay?" Lucy nodded, tears glinting. She thought of the hospital's oncology floor and the children who found comfort in Shadow's presence. "I will," she promised. And with that, the Marshes departed, leaving behind a renewed sense of connection that Lucy cherished. She knelt to hug Shadow tight, wordlessly thanking him for guiding her on a path she never expected, yet couldn't imagine abandoning now. Summer advanced in gentle waves, coaxing blooming flowers from the soil and washing the neighborhood in lush greens. Lucy found her own life blossoming too, shaped by each visit she and Shadow made to hospitals, libraries, or senior centers. The old ache in her chest hadn't disappeared, but it softened with each smile they sparked. One radiant morning, Lucy opened her mailbox to discover a letter from a prominent children's hospital in the next county. Their therapy director had heard praise about Shadow's patient, soothing presence, and wanted to invite them for a large youth event. The request startled Lucy with its scope, but thrilled her. She remembered every moment Shadow had lifted a child's spirit, bringing warmth where disease sowed despair. Eagerly, she called Patrice to discuss the invitation. Patrice answered in her usual bright tone, congratulating Lucy on the recognition. After verifying details, she confirmed that Lucy's mother could accompany them to the children's hospital event, scheduled 3 weeks away. Lucy scribbled the date on a calendar tacked to her bedroom wall, her mind spinning with what to expect. A large turnout of patients, volunteers, and families meant a chance for Shadow to comfort many kids. Later that day, Lucy wrote an email to Emily and Robert Marsh updating them. She attached a photo from their last hospital visit, a young boy hugging Shadow with gratitude in his eyes. Within hours, Emily replied, touched to see how Annabelle's dog continued to spread hope. Robert echoed her sentiments, saying the invitation felt like yet another step in honoring Annabelle's memory. Over the next few weeks, Lucy and Shadow maintained their usual schedule of smaller visits. The library reading circle expanded to include new families, and the nursing home staff organized a little party to thank the volunteers. Lucy's mother made cupcakes, adding small paw print decorations in honor of Shadow. The dog accepted the attention with quiet grace, though Lucy sometimes caught a wistful light in his eyes, as if searching for the missing figure who first taught him devotion. Late in the evenings, Lucy continued adding color to Annabelle's unfinished sketches, layering gentle strokes of pastel into the outlines. In her heart, she felt a tug toward the approaching hospital event. Perhaps, in that grand setting, she could bring an even brighter spark of comfort, just as Annabelle would have wanted. At last, the much-anticipated date arrived. Lucy woke before dawn, too nervous to sleep, and found Shadow sprawled by her door as usual. She made sure his vest was spotless and checked a small kit of supplies, extra treats, a water dish, and some coloring books for children who needed a distraction. Her father drove them to the hospital in the next county, the early sunlight gilding buildings in soft gold. As they stepped into the bustling lobby, Lucy felt her pulse quicken. Tall banners announced a day of joy for pediatric patients, and the entire space buzzed with families, volunteers, and medical staff. Lucy's mother squeezed her hand, murmuring encouragement. Shadow, tail wagging slowly, followed Lucy through the crowd as though sensing this was truly their biggest day yet. Their assigned station was a brightly decorated auditorium where rows of tables displayed crafts and games. Children milled about, some hooked up to IVs, others wearing protective masks. In a far corner, 2 clowns entertained a giggling audience. Lucy noticed a few therapy dogs already stationed, each drawing curious kids. She guided Shadow to an unoccupied area, spread out a soft blanket, and waited. Gradually, families approached. Some recognized Shadow from local news stories. Others simply felt drawn by his calm aura. A little girl in a pastel beanie toddled forward, eyeing him shyly. Her father explained she was recovering from a procedure. Lucy coaxed the girl to pat Shadow, and the dog responded by gently licking her wrist. The giggle that followed was soft music in Lucy's ears. Soon more children gathered, some chatting animatedly, others quietly leaning against a parent. An older boy in a wheelchair wheeled closer, curiosity shining in his eyes. Lucy introduced Shadow, explaining his story and how he had once helped her best friend. The boy listened intently, then asked if Shadow could do any commands. With a grin, Lucy demonstrated, "Sit, stay, and shake," receiving applause from onlookers. In a moment of boldness, the boy reached out to touch Shadow's fur, tears forming in his eyes. He confided that his own dog back home never got to visit him in the hospital. Lucy knelt, offering a reassuring pat on his shoulder. "Shadow's here for you," she said softly. "He'll share all the love he can." He wagged his tail as if agreeing. A steady stream of children and parents continued to arrive, turning the auditorium into a tapestry of smiles, tears, and tender moments. Lucy realized how deeply these families needed small reprieves, brief windows in which fear melted away. Time passed swiftly. Volunteers handed out snacks, performed skits, and led songs. Shadow remained calm through it all, letting children rest their hands on his sturdy frame. When the official program ended, hospital staff approached Lucy to express their thanks. One nurse recalled how heartbreak could isolate families, making them feel no one understood. "But a dog like Shadow breaks down walls," she said. "He reminds us we're not alone." Lucy blinked back tears, recalling the dark nights Annabelle endured. She was sure Shadow's unwavering devotion meant no one truly faced despair alone. Driving home, Lucy felt both uplifted and emotionally spent. She replayed each interaction, from a timid toddler's first smile to the determined grin of an older child triumphing over pain. Shadow dozed in the back seat, his head resting on Lucy's backpack. Her mother glanced over, asking if she was all right. Lucy offered a nod, then admitted she felt a strange mixture of sadness and hope. As they pulled into the driveway, Lucy spotted Harriet's car parked out front. Harriet emerged, waving a greeting. Over a cup of tea, she explained she'd visited Emily and Robert earlier. They were doing as well as one could expect, finding ways to honor Annabelle's memory by supporting local charities. Hearing this made Lucy's heart ache less, replaced by a sense of shared purpose. A few evenings later, Lucy sat at her desk, flipping through the partially finished sketches Annabelle had left behind. Shadow rested at her feet, occasionally shifting to press his muzzle against her calf. Soft lamplight illuminated the swirl of pastel hues Lucy had added to meadows and starlit skies. In these pages, she found a resonance with Annabelle's gentle soul. That night, a spark of inspiration struck. Perhaps she could host a small art exhibit in the community center, featuring Annabelle's paintings alongside the final pieces Lucy had completed. The proceeds could go to the hospital's children's wing, or a charity chosen by Emily and Robert. Overwhelmed by the idea, Lucy whispered to Shadow that she longed to give back more. The dog responded with a quiet sigh of agreement. She hurried to share the proposal with her parents, who offered enthusiastic support, and soon Harriet volunteered to help plan. Over the next few days, Lucy worked on finishing the last sketches, refining clouds or adding blossoms, just as she imagined Annabelle might have done. Whenever doubt crept in, she remembered the determined spark in her friend's eyes. Shadow seemed equally eager, wagging his tail whenever Lucy spread the artwork across the living room floor. Harriet reached out to Emily and Robert, who embraced the plan wholeheartedly. They said Annabelle would have loved bringing beauty to others. Lucy felt nervous and exhilarated at the prospect of unveiling these pieces to the community. Deep down, she sensed this exhibit was more than art. It was a celebration of hope beyond sorrow. The community center's multi-purpose hall buzzed with anticipation on the day of Annabelle's memorial art exhibit. Lucy arrived early, carefully laying out the last of the paintings she and Annabelle had, in a sense, created together. Each piece revealed a scene of tranquil beauty: soft meadows, pastel skies, and the silhouette of a proud German shepherd watching over it all. Shadow paced near the entrance while Harriet helped arrange small plaques explaining the backstory of every sketch. Lucy's parents moved tables and chairs into place, while Emily and Robert Marsh stood with tearful eyes admiring the scope of their daughter's enduring influence. By mid-afternoon, the hall filled with visitors, neighbors, classmates, local artists, and curious onlookers who had heard about the event through social media or the local newspaper. Many came to support the cause, which aimed to raise funds for Meadowbrook Children's Hospital in Annabelle's name. A few paused to read the tribute Lucy had written, printed on a large poster at the entrance. In memory of Annabelle Marsh, who taught us that love transcends fear, and that a loyal friend, whether human or canine, can bring light to the darkest moments. Throughout the afternoon, murmurs of appreciation mixed with soft guitar music playing in the background. Some people recognized Lucy and Shadow from their recent therapy visits. Others were moved by the poignant notes describing how Annabelle's illness inspired the artwork. Lucy kept busy, greeting guests, answering questions, and occasionally leading them to the corner where Shadow lay quietly, wearing a small bandana marked "In Loving Memory." Every so often, she would glance at Emily and Robert, who stood together near a large painting of Annabelle in silhouette, walking side by side with Shadow. Though sorrow flickered in their eyes, there was also unmistakable pride. As more people arrived, the sound of hushed conversations rose like a soft tide. A local reporter approached Lucy, asking if she could record a brief interview. Nervous, Lucy agreed, and Shadow stayed right at her side. "Could you tell us about your inspiration?" the reporter asked, holding a microphone gently toward Lucy. She took a calming breath, remembering Annabelle's brave smile. "Annabelle was my best friend," Lucy began, voice trembling. "When she got sick, Shadow was brought in to help her cope. He was more than a pet. He was her protector, sensing her pain, giving her comfort. After she passed, he came to live with me. We've continued his work, visiting kids in hospitals, libraries, and nursing homes, trying to spread the same hope he gave her." Completing her unfinished paintings felt like a final collaboration, showing how light can shine even when someone's gone. The reporter's eyes misted. "And today, you're raising funds for the Children's Hospital?" Lucy nodded. "Yes, we want to channel Annabelle's legacy into something that keeps helping others. She never wanted people to lose hope, even in the worst circumstances. Shadow and I are just doing our part." The reporter thanked her, finishing the interview with a warm smile. Lucy exhaled, relieved. She realized that, in speaking those words, she felt a measure of peace. It was as if every therapy visit, every tear shed, and every brushstroke on a half-finished sketch had prepared her to share Annabelle's story with courage. Across the room, Emily stood at a table of refreshments, chatting with Harriet and Dean, while Robert leafed through a guest book where people wrote messages about Annabelle. Strains of quiet music drifted from a small stage at the far end of the hall. Lucy's mother approached, carrying a plate of cookies, and gently guided Lucy to take a short break. "You've worked hard," her mother said, pressing a hand to Lucy's shoulder. "Eat something and breathe." Lucy nodded but paused when she noticed a small group of children gathering around Shadow. They were likely from the library reading program, a few holding picture books. One girl gently touched the dog's ears, whispering, "It's him. He helped me read in front of everyone." Lucy's chest warmed, witnessing how children who once avoided reading aloud now glowed with pride, hugging Shadow like a familiar friend. He accepted their attention with serene composure, tail thumping on the floor. Lucy's mother pulled her aside gently. "They'll be here a while, honey. Take a moment for yourself." Though Lucy's mind buzzed with tasks, she followed her mother's advice and stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The afternoon sun glowed over the community center's lawn, and a gentle breeze ruffled her hair. She closed her eyes, recalling the nights she and Annabelle had whispered secret hopes and silly jokes under starlit skies. A tear escaped her, carrying both longing and gratitude. She sensed a presence behind her, soft footfalls. Turning, she found Robert Marsh. "You okay?" he asked, voice low. Lucy nodded. "It's just emotions. I'm proud we're doing this, but I still miss her every day." Robert managed a somber smile. "We do too. Seeing what you and Shadow have accomplished, it feels like she's still here, guiding us. Lucy swallowed a lump in her throat. I hope so. I just wish. Her voice broke, but Robert placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. She lives on in our hearts, Lucy, and through Shadow, and through you. This exhibit, it's exactly what she would have loved. People coming together, sharing kindness. Thank you. Before Lucy could respond, a small commotion arose from the entrance. A woman Lucy recognized from the hospital stepped in, gently wheeling a boy with thinning hair. The boy's eyes lit up upon spotting Shadow near the paintings. Lucy hurried inside, Robert behind her, and realized the boy was Kyle, the young patient who had once been too weak to leave his bed. His mother spoke to a volunteer, explaining that Kyle begged to see the dog who saved him from feeling sad. Tears pricked Lucy's eyes. Kyle's gaze swept the exhibit, then landed on Shadow. Despite an oxygen tube under his nose, the boy smiled with unmistakable joy. Lucy beckoned gently, leading Shadow forward. Kyle rubbed the dog's cheeks, face shining. I'm feeling better, he said in a raspy voice. When I got stronger, we came today. Lucy managed a wobbly grin, her heart swelling. The mother quietly thanked Lucy for sharing her dog's gift, admitting that Kyle's outlook had improved after meeting Shadow. Seeing the two of them at the exhibit, a hospital visitor venturing out for the first time, reinforced Lucy's belief that all these small gestures of love mattered. As the afternoon wore on, more patrons admired the artwork and shared personal stories of loss or hope. The donation jar on a central table gradually filled with bills and checks, while a separate station accepted card payments. By evening, when the last guests left, Lucy's mother tallied the contributions, revealing a sum far exceeding their original goal. Emily and Robert openly wept upon hearing that Meadowbrook Children's Hospital would receive substantial support in Annabelle's name. Finally, Lucy exhaled in exhausted wonder. Tables were cleared, leftover cookies packed away, and staff began taking down decorations. Shadow flopped onto a quiet corner of the room, as though content but worn out from so many interactions. Harriet and Dean embraced Lucy, congratulating her on a beautiful tribute. Emily, her eyes puffy from crying, squeezed Lucy's hand. You gave us a gift we never thought to receive, she said, voice thick with emotion. Lucy's parents and the Marshes loaded the framed paintings into their cars. They planned to deliver a few as keepsakes to friends or family. The rest would be stored safely in Lucy's home until the hospital confirmed a spot for a small display in the pediatric wing, an idea the staff had enthusiastically embraced that very day. As Lucy collected Shadow's vest and double-checked that no personal items were left behind, she spotted Annabelle's largest painting, an almost finished sunset with Shadow silhouetted among wildflowers, leaning against the wall. She remembered the final pastel strokes she had added, blending gentle oranges and pinks in honor of Annabelle's hope. The piece now stood as a testament to all they had endured and all they had become. Outside, dusk settled in shades of lavender. Lucy crouched to give Shadow a proper hug. We did it, she whispered into his fur. He let out a small rumble of contentment. Robert, stepping away from the trunk of his car, paused to watch. Annabelle would be so proud, he repeated softly, as though the phrase could never be said enough. With a final wave, the Marshes drove off. Lucy and her parents did the same, Shadow perched in the back seat, gazing out at the darkening sky. Back home, the house was tranquil. Lucy's father made hot chocolate as a small celebration, and they all clinked mugs around the kitchen table. The hush felt satisfying, like exhaling after a long-held breath. Shadow meandered under the table, eventually resting his head on Lucy's foot. Lucy's mother studied her daughter's face. You know, there's no telling how many lives you and Shadow will touch next, she remarked. Lucy nodded. I don't have a plan for the future yet, she admitted. But I do know that wherever we go, we'll keep sharing his gift of comfort. For Annabelle. Her voice wavered but held firm with conviction. Nightfall brought cool air through open windows. Lucy retreated to her room, still buzzing with the day's emotions. She set Annabelle's sketchbook on her desk, flipping to the last page, a gentle pencil outline of shadow beside a cluster of flowers. Lucy had never colored it in, preferring to leave one piece precisely as Annabelle had left it, a final reminder of how their friendship began and ended. She closed the book gently, pressing her palm against the cover. "Thank you," she whispered to the quiet room, certain that Annabelle heard. Then Shadow nosed the door open and padded inside. He pressed his forehead to Lucy's knee. She smiled, reached down to scratch behind his ears, and felt a wave of calm spread through her. In that tender moment, Lucy realized something vital. Although sorrow might never fully disappear, love had the power to weave new beginnings from the threads of heartbreak. And Shadow, devoted, perceptive, and guided by an unbreakable bond, was living proof that the spirit of one beloved girl would continue shining in every gentle wag of his tail.